Have you ever considered how our emotional state influences the act of creation? Picture the emergence of the ego from the mystical cycle of the Ouroboros, stepping forward into a world where the sense of paradise is shattered. This moment of consciousness, of ego, is not only a birth of self-awareness, but also a birth of pain, suffering, problems, diseases, evil, and death. In the grand act of creation, the ego unfolds its consciousness, experiencing an intense sense of loneliness. It's like a child who has been regulated by something divine and all-encompassing, suddenly finds the divine hand removed. One can think of this state as a religious paradise, where everything was governed by God, or ethically, where everything was good and evil was yet to enter the world. The ego consciousness not only brings a sense of loneliness, but also carries with it suffering, pain, problems, diseases, evil, and death. The ego, in asserting its identity, grasps the negative and attaches itself to it. This connection between self-realization and the suffering that ensues is powerful. It sees its creation as guilt and suffering and death as its punishment. The life sensation of the primitive man is thus driven by terror, dominated by the negative influences surrounding him, in addition to the feeling of guilt. The primal man sees all negatives coming from the violation of the taboo. His perception of cause and effect is colored by emotions primarily because the ego is not yet developed. As the ego consciousness becomes self-aware and falls, it increasingly feels its impotence. The result is that the dominant feelings are those of being at the mercy of higher powers. The primitive man who becomes aware of himself and the world's suffering remains separated from it. This is his uniqueness and his suffering, which initially appears as a loss, but eventually turns out positive again. The ego, the individual, gains the ability to connect to objects. An object can be a person, a thing, the world, God, etc. It becomes part of a qualitatively different unity, which is no longer the original unity governed by the Ouroboros. Only with the separation of the world's parents does the world become dual. This separation stems from the development of the personality centered around the ego and many other parts that are much less conscious. This division also causes a change in the principle of ambivalence. Originally, opposites could function side by side without opposing each other. Now, as the ego consciousness has matured, the contrast between the conscious and the unconscious causes them to be antagonistic. This means that one can no longer love and hate something at the same time. The ego identifies with one of the opposites and leaves the other in the unconscious, either suppressing it or denying it. Only when a person becomes conscious and accepts both opposing poles does he succeed in seeing the complete picture of the world. This loss of wholeness and of unconscious integration with the world is experienced as the primary loss. In conclusion, the ego's consciousness, while bringing a sense of individuality and self-awareness, also brings with it suffering, pain, problems, diseases, evil, and death. This state of consciousness, marked by a sense of loneliness and separation, is an integral part of the human experience. The concept of loss, whether it's the loss of unity with the world or the loss of innocence, is a recurring theme in our journey towards self-awareness. As we navigate through the complexities of the ego, consciousness, suffering, and the concept of loss, we gain a deeper understanding of our existence and our place in the world.